Poor widow was hired just to clean the barn, until the rancher found his twins sleeping in her arms. The sun was sinking behind the Wyoming hills when Clara May Turner stepped down from the rickety stagecoach, clutching a carpetbag that had seen better days. The driver tossed down her single trunk and gave her a nod before snapping the reins and rattling away, leaving her in a swirl of red dust. The wide, open land stretched endlessly around her, golden fields rolling into distant blue-gray mountains. The air was sharp with the scent of sagebrush and hay. Somewhere far off, a windmill creaked. Clara stood there for a long moment, her thin shoulders squared, her worn boots sinking slightly into the dirt. She was tired, bone-tired. The long journey had rattled her to the core, and her heart still ached from everything she'd lost. Her husband, James Turner, had been a kind man, a farmer with dreams bigger than their little patch of land. But dreams couldn't fight fever. When the sickness swept through their small Kansas town, he'd been gone within days. Then the bank came for the farm. And just when she thought her grief couldn't cut deeper, the fever took her baby boy too. She had buried her son with her own hands under a tree behind the church. After that, the silence of her empty house became too much to bear. So when she saw a small ad pinned at the post office, "Help wanted. Work at Red Creek Ranch. Room and board included," she took it as a sign. Maybe God was giving her one more chance. The ranch was bigger than she expected. Fences stretched as far as the eye could see, cattle dotted the meadows, and the main house stood proudly on a small rise, its white paint faded but still dignified. She walked up the dusty road until she reached the barn, a sprawling red building with peeling paint and a crooked weather vane. The scent of hay, horse, and dust hit her full in the face. Inside, a man with a thick mustache and a grim expression was waiting. He wore a worn leather vest and held a clipboard. "You're the widow?" he asked gruffly. "Yes, sir," Clara said softly, clutching her bag tighter. "Clara May Turner." He eyed her up and down. "Mr. Carver's lookin' for a hand who can keep the place tidy. No fancy expectations. Pays $2 a week and a bunk in the old shed out back. Still want it?" Clara nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll work hard." "Fine," he said, handing her a broom that looked older than she was. "Start with the barn. Been near 6 months since anyone cleaned proper." He left her there, the big doors creaking shut behind him. Clara stood still for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through the slats. The barn was vast, shadowy beams high overhead, shafts of sunlight cutting through the dust motes. The smell of hay, leather, and old wood surrounded her. She set down her bag, rolled up her sleeves, and whispered under her breath, "All right, Clara May. One step at a time." She began sweeping, moving methodically across the floor. Every swish of the broom echoed through the quiet barn. The rhythm soothed her, gave her something to hold on to. Then she heard it, a soft giggle. Clara froze. She turned, broom in hand, heart pounding. Again, another giggle, then a whisper. It was coming from behind a stack of hay bales. She walked over slowly, peered around the corner, and nearly gasped. 2 little boys, identical twins no older than 6, sat crouched together, covered in hay and grinning like foxes. One had a piece of straw between his teeth, the other held a small wooden horse. "Well now," Clara said softly, crouching down. "Who do we have here?" The braver of the two puffed out his chest. "I'm Ben Carver. That's my brother Billy. Who are you?" "I'm Miss Clara," she said with a smile. "Looks like I'll be working here for a while." Billy squinted. "You gonna clean our barn?" "I suppose I am," she said, chuckling. They looked at each other, then nodded in silent agreement, the kind only twins understand. "Can we help?" Ben asked. Clara hesitated, then handed them each a small brush. "If you want. But no mischief." Their laughter filled the barn like sunlight through storm clouds. Hours passed quickly. Together they swept, dusted, and even fed the chickens that wandered in from the yard. When Clara finally sank down on a bale of hay to rest, the twins plopped down beside her, yawning. She looked at them, 2 innocent faces smudged with dirt, eyes drooping with exhaustion, and something deep in her heart stirred. Before she realized it, both boys had curled up against her, their heads resting in her lap. She froze, afraid to move. But when she looked down and saw their peaceful faces, her throat tightened. She ran a gentle hand through their tousled blonde hair and whispered, "Sleep, little ones. You're safe." Her humming filled the quiet barn, a tune she used to sing to her own baby. Outside, twilight fell over Red Creek Ranch. And at that very moment, up on the hill near the main house, Luke Carver, the boy's father, stepped out onto the porch, looking toward the barn. He frowned when he noticed the faint light still burning inside. Something about it, soft, steady, alive, made him pause. He didn't yet know that inside, a poor widow was holding the very pieces of his heart he thought he'd buried with his wife. The morning after her first night at Red Creek Ranch dawned cold and crisp. Mist rose off the fields as the first light touched the hills, painting them gold. The rooster crowed somewhere near the chicken coop and Clara was already awake, her fingers raw, her back sore, but her heart strangely calm. She hadn't slept much in her small shed behind the barn. The straw mattress was lumpy, the roof leaked a little, and coyotes howled in the distance. But she'd grown used to worse. At least here she had work. And purpose. She buttoned up her faded blue dress, pinned her hair back neatly, and stepped into the morning air. The ranch was coming alive, men shouting to one another, horses snorting, the clang of a metal bucket echoing from the well. From a distance, Luke Carver was already at work, barking orders to the hands, tall and broad-shouldered against the sunrise. His hat shadowed his face, but his voice carried over the field, steady, commanding, the voice of a man used to being obeyed. Clara watched him for a brief moment before she forced herself to look away. She'd heard whispers already, how his wife Annie had died 3 years ago giving birth to their twin boys. How Luke had turned hard afterward, throwing himself into work, shutting out anything that reminded him of love or laughter. He was known across the county as the best rancher in Red Creek Valley, and the loneliest man alive. Later that day, Clara found herself sweeping the porch when she heard the twins laughing somewhere behind the barn. She smiled. Those boys were trouble wrapped in sunshine. Ben came running first, dragging a wooden stick like a sword. Billy followed, his face streaked with dust and hay. They were chasing each other around the trough, giggling so hard they could barely breathe. "Slow down," Clara called. "You'll trip." Of course they didn't listen. Seconds later, Billy's foot caught a bucket, sending water splashing across both of them. The boys froze, then looked at her sheepishly. Clara crossed her arms, fighting a smile. "Well now, looks like we'll be washing your clothes sooner than planned." "Don't tell Pa," Ben begged. "Please," Billy added, clutching her skirt. Clara knelt down, her expression softening. "Your secret's safe with me, boys. But let's clean up before you catch cold." She wrung out their wet shirts, hung them near the barn door, and wrapped both twins in an old blanket. The air smelled of rain and wood smoke. The boys leaned against her, content and drowsy. Without realizing it, Clara began humming a lullaby, an old hymn her mother used to sing. The sound floated softly through the barn, weaving through the beams like a prayer. By the time she looked down, both boys were fast asleep, their heads resting on her lap, the blanket pulled up to their chins. For a moment, she simply stared at them, those little faces so peaceful, so trusting, and her chest ached with something bittersweet. Memories rose unbidden. Her own baby's tiny hand curled around her finger, the way his laughter used to fill their cabin before the fever took him. Her throat tightened, but she brushed the tears away and smiled faintly. "Rest easy, my darlings," she whispered. "The world's kinder when you're asleep." Outside, footsteps crunched on the dirt. Luke Carver had come looking for his sons. He hadn't seen them since breakfast, and the ranch hand said they'd been helping the new woman clean. That alone made his jaw tighten. He pushed open the barn door quietly, his shadow long in the late afternoon light. And there they were. Ben and Billy, his whole heart, the only good left in his world, lay curled in the lap of a woman he barely knew. A poor widow, her dark hair loose around her face, humming softly while sunlight framed her in gold. Something in Luke's chest twisted. He hadn't seen his boys look that peaceful in years. Usually they fought sleep like wild colts, restless and loud. But now, in her arms, they were still. Safe. Clara looked up suddenly and gasped when she saw him in the doorway. She tried to stand, flustered, but Luke raised a hand. "Don't," he said quietly. "You'll wake him." His voice was deep, rough from disuse. He stepped closer, his boots silent on the straw. The scent of leather and cedar clung to him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carver," Clara whispered. "They just drifted off. I didn't mean to." Luke shook his head, his gaze fixed on the twins. "Don't apologize. They haven't slept this sound since their ma passed." Clara's heart clenched. "I didn't know. I'm sorry for your loss." He nodded stiffly. "Long time ago. I just ain't used to seeing him so calm." He studied her face, tired but kind, lined with both sorrow and strength. For a fleeting second, he saw something there he hadn't seen in a woman since Annie, gentleness. The kind that healed quietly. He cleared his throat and stepped back. "You can keep him there a while. Let him sleep. I'll get supper started." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "You did good, Mrs. Turner." She blinked in surprise. No one had said those words to her in a long time. When he left, the barn felt warmer somehow. The golden light deepened, the wind softened, and Clara sat there, motionless, afraid to disturb the peace. For the first time in years she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt needed. And though she didn't yet know it, that simple moment, 2 sleeping boys in her lap, and a rancher's quiet gratitude, had already begun to change everything. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm, one Clara hadn't known she needed. Every morning before dawn she lit the stove in the ranch kitchen, brewed coffee for the hands and packed biscuits for the field crew. Then she swept out the barn, brushed the horses and hung laundry to dry in the soft, early sun. Her hands were rough and her back ached by midday, but it was a good ache, the kind that came with purpose. She had a place again. A roof. And laughter. Oh, there was laughter. Because wherever Clara went, Ben and Billy Carver weren't far behind. The twins had decided, without question or consultation, that she was their person now. They followed her into the barn, into the kitchen, even into the chicken yard, where they promptly discovered the rooster had a personal vendetta against small boys. She'd found them shrieking, running circles around the coop while the rooster flapped after them in fury. Mercy. Clara laughed, catching the bird under her apron. You boys best stick to collecting eggs that aren't guarded. The twins giggled so hard they fell into the hay. By evening, their laughter always drew the same thing, a shadow in the doorway watching. Luke Carver. Luke tried to tell himself he was just keeping an eye on things, making sure the new hire wasn't spoiling the boys or neglecting her chores. But every time he saw her, something quiet stirred in his chest. She wasn't like the others he'd hired. Most women left after a week, tired of mud, wild boys, and a man who never smiled. But Clara worked like she meant it. She never complained, never asked for more. And she had a way with his sons that made his throat tighten. They listened to her. They adored her. One afternoon, Luke found her sitting cross-legged in the barn, sewing a rip in Billy's shirt while the twins helped, which meant tangling her thread and dropping buttons in the straw. He leaned against the doorway quietly, arms folded. Careful with that needle, Ben, she warned gently. You're fixin' to poke yourself. Ben grinned. I ain't scared. Brave talk, she teased, for a boy who ran from a rooster. Luke had to stifle a laugh behind his hand. She looked up then and noticed him. Oh, Mr. Carver, I didn't hear you come in. Didn't mean to interrupt, he said, stepping forward. Looks like you've got him trained better than I do. They're good boys, she said softly, smoothing Billy's hair. They just need someone patient enough to listen. Luke hesitated, the words catching in his throat. They're my used to say that. The air went still. Clara lowered her eyes. She must have been a kind woman. She was, he said after a moment. Too kind for this world. He turned to go, but something about the way Clara's shoulders slumped made him pause. You've lost someone too, haven't you? He asked quietly. Her breath caught. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then she whispered, Yes, sir. My husband. And our boy. Luke's jaw tightened. He didn't speak. But his gaze softened, and for the first time, Clara saw the man behind the hardness, the grief, the weariness, the years of holding everything together alone. He gave a small nod. I'm sorry. So am I, she said, her voice barely audible. That evening, Clara sat by the barn window after the twins had gone to bed. The moonlight spilled across the hay. She pulled out a small silver locket from her pocket and opened it. Inside was a tiny drawing, a rough pencil sketch of her late husband, James, holding their baby boy. She traced the outline with her thumb. I'll make something of myself, James, she whispered into the quiet. I'll find peace somehow. For him, and maybe for me. She closed the locket, tucking it against her heart. Outside, she didn't notice Luke walking past the barn, glancing toward the light that still burned inside. He stopped for a long moment, staring through the crack in the door. He saw her sitting there alone, face soft in the lamplight, her eyes distant and full of loss. Something inside him, something he thought had died with his wife, stirred back to life. He didn't understand it yet, but he knew the ranch felt different now. The silence wasn't so heavy. The laughter wasn't so foreign. And when he turned away that night, Luke Carver realized, with a faint ache in his chest, that the widow he'd hired to clean his barn was quietly cleaning the dust off his heart too. By late summer, the days at Red Creek Ranch grew long and heavy with heat. The sky often glowed a strange yellow before dusk, and thunder rumbled far off in the mountains like a warning. Clara could always sense a storm coming before the others did. She said the wind had a restless voice when the clouds were gathering. That morning the air felt too still, too quiet. Even the horses were uneasy. She was in the barn mending saddle straps when Ben and Billy came running in, their cheeks flushed. "Miss Clara. Miss Clara. The pup's gone," Ben cried. Clara looked up, alarmed. "The little brown one from the litter?" "Yes, ma'am," Billy said, tears brimming in his eyes. "Pa said we can't keep him if he keeps wandering, but we didn't mean for him to run off." She smiled gently, trying to calm them. "Now don't fret. He'll come back once he gets hungry." But outside, the wind was picking up, bending the tall grass, dark clouds rolling fast over the ridge. "Stay inside," she said firmly. "There's a storm brewing. I'll tell your pa when I see him." By the time Luke rode in from the north pasture, the sky had turned an ugly green-gray. The ranch hands were rushing to gather the herd, thunder booming closer. He spotted Clara near the porch, her hair whipping in the wind as she helped tie down feed sacks. "Get inside," he shouted over the wind. "What about the boys?" she called back. "With Emma in the house, I reckon." But when he reached the front door and called out for them, silence. He ran through every room, his voice rising. "Ben. Billy." No answer. Panic struck his chest. He turned to the maid, Emma, who wrung her hands nervously. "They said they were going to find their puppy, sir, before the rain came." Luke's heart stopped cold. He spun toward the door, shouting, "They're out there?" Before Emma could answer, Clara appeared behind him, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. "I'll find them," she said quickly. "You'll do no such thing," Luke snapped. "It's not safe out there." "They're just children, Mr. Carver," she said, her eyes flashing with desperation. "If that storm breaks, they won't stand a chance." And before he could stop her, Clara was gone, darting across the yard, her skirt whipping in the wind. The storm hit like a freight train. Rain pounded the earth, the wind howled through the trees, and lightning split the sky. Clara called out again and again, her voice raw against the roaring thunder. "Ben. Billy. Where are you?" Her dress was soaked through, her hair plastered to her face, but she kept running. She stumbled through mud, climbed over a fallen fence, and raised her lantern high, its flickering light fighting the darkness. Finally, over the wind, she heard it, a faint whimper. "Ben," she cried. "Miss Clara," a tiny voice answered. She followed the sound, slipping and falling to her knees in the mud. There, beneath a fallen oak, huddled the twins, clutching the trembling puppy in their arms. She dropped the lantern, rushing to them, her voice breaking. "Oh, thank heavens. You're safe." Billy was sobbing. "We couldn't find our way back." Clara gathered them close, wrapping her shawl around all three of them. "Hush, my loves. I've got you now." Rain drenched her to the bone, but she didn't care. She pulled them tight against her chest, shielding them with her body as the thunder rolled overhead. "Close your eyes," she whispered, her lips trembling. "Mama's here." It slipped out before she realized it, the word mama. But neither boy corrected her. They only buried their faces deeper into her arms and held on. When Luke finally found them, the storm had calmed to a cold drizzle. He spotted the flicker of a dying lantern and ran toward it. There on the barn floor lay Clara, mud-soaked and trembling, both boys asleep in her arms under her shawl. The puppy was tucked between them. Luke dropped to his knees beside her. "Clara?" Her eyes fluttered open, barely focusing. "They're safe," she whispered. He brushed wet hair from her face, his hand shaking. "You could have been killed." "It don't matter," she murmured, voice weak. "I promised I'd take care of them." Something inside him cracked wide open. He had buried every feeling that made him human, grief, warmth, hope, but now, seeing her there, protecting the only things he loved in the world, he felt all of it come flooding back. He lifted her gently, carrying her inside while the boys followed, half asleep. Emma gasped when she saw the state they were in, rushing to fetch blankets. Luke sat beside the hearth, holding Clara's hand while the firelight danced across her face. For the first time he prayed out loud. "Lord," he whispered, "I don't know what you're doing, but thank you for sending her." That night, as rain tapped softly on the roof, Luke checked on the twins once more. They were fast asleep, curled together under quilts, peaceful as angels. And across the room on the settee near the fire, Clara stirred. He draped a blanket over her shoulders, his eyes softening. "Reckon you've done more for this family in one storm than I've managed in 3 years, he said quietly. Her lips curved in a sleepy smile. "Maybe we both just needed savon, Mr. Carver?" He looked down at her for a long moment, her hair still damp, her face serene, and felt something he hadn't dared feel in years, hope. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered, mud in the fields, broken fences, and a new tender quiet that hung over Red Creek Ranch. In the days that followed, Luke's sons wouldn't leave Clara's side. They trailed behind her as she hung laundry, swept porches, and baked biscuits. If she stopped for even a moment, one of them tugged at her skirts. "Miss Clara," Billy asked one morning, "do you think God made you come here to be our mama?" The words nearly stopped her heart. She set down the washcloth, kneeling so she was eye level with him. "Oh, honey," she whispered, "I think God sends people where they're most needed. And right now, I reckon he thought you boys needed someone to bake you too many biscuits." Billy laughed and hugged her neck. "We like you more than biscuits." But as she smiled and hugged him back, Clara felt a twinge of fear. She had come to the ranch needing a job, not a family. Yet each passing day the lines between the two blurred, until her heart didn't know the difference anymore. And it seemed, the town had noticed. The first whispers started at Miss Grady's general store in Red Creek. Two women stood near the flour barrels, voices sharp as sewing needles. "You heard about the new widow up at Carver's ranch? The one who near drowned herself in that storm?" "The very one. Folks say Luke Carver's been actin' strange ever since. Letting her sit at the supper table, lettin' his boys cling to her like she's their ma." The other said, raising a brow. "Ain't decent, a woman alone livin' under a man's roof. Doesn't take much to ruin a reputation." Their laughter followed Clara as she stepped out of the store, holding her small parcel of flour and sugar. She'd heard every word. By the time she reached the wagon, her cheeks burned. She gripped the reins tightly, blinking hard against the sting in her eyes. That evening, when Luke found her scrubbing the porch steps long after sunset, he frowned. "Clara, it's near dark. Come on inside." She didn't look up. "I'll finish this, sir." He stepped closer. "You've been quiet all day. Something happen in town?" She hesitated, then straightened slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Carver, folks are talking." "About me?" "About us." Luke's jaw tightened. "Town's been talking since the day I buried my wife. Ain't none of it ever mattered." "It matters to me," she said, her voice trembling. "They think I came here to trap you, to take advantage of your kindness." He took a deep breath, his eyes hardening. "You've done nothing wrong, Clara. You saved my boys. You keep this place running. Let him talk." But she shook her head, stepping back. "You don't understand. I've lost everything before. I can't lose my name too." Luke's brow furrowed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe it's best if I leave," she whispered. The words hung in the air like the echo of thunder. Luke stared at her, this woman who had brought warmth back into his home, laughter to his boys, and something unexplainable to his own weary heart, and he felt something inside him revolt. "No," he said flatly. "You're not running off because of gossip." "Please," she said softly. "You've given me more kindness than I deserve. I can't repay it by bringing shame to your name." He stepped closer, voice low but steady. "You think I care what they say? Clara, for 3 years I've been a ghost walking through this house. Since the night of that storm, I felt alive again. You gave me that. Don't you take it away." Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head. "I don't belong here, Luke. Your boys, this ranch, they deserve better." He reached for her hand, rough fingers trembling slightly. "They deserve you. And I." He stopped, the words too raw, too real. For a long moment, neither spoke. The cicadas sang in the distance, and the sky burned orange with the last of the sunset. Finally, Clara pulled her hand free. "Please don't make this harder." Then she turned and walked toward the barn, her footsteps echoing against the wooden boards. That night, Luke couldn't sleep. He sat by the dying fire, staring into the embers, the twins asleep upstairs. He heard her in the shed, packing what few belongings she had, clothes, a comb, a small Bible, and the silver locket she always wore close to her heart. He thought of stopping her. But something held him back. Instead, he whispered into the quiet. "If you walk away now, Clara May Turner, I reckon this place'll go dark again." Just before dawn, he found her at the gate, her carpet bag at her feet. The sky was pale, the air cool and still. "You really mean to leave?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Luke looked at her for a long time, then said quietly, "You came here to clean a barn. And you ended up cleaning 3 hearts that didn't know how to love anymore. If that's something to be ashamed of, then let him talk." Her lip trembled. "Luke?" He stepped closer, his voice thick with emotion. "You belong here, Clara. With them. With me." For the first time he reached out and touched her cheek, rough thumb brushing away a tear. But she only whispered, "I can't stay where I'm not wanted." And before he could speak, she turned and walked down the dusty road, her figure growing smaller against the rising sun. Behind her, the ranch stood silent, until two small voices broke through the dawn. "Pa!" Ben shouted from the porch. "Where's Miss Clara?" Luke's heart clenched. She had to go into town. Billy frowned. "But she promised to make us pancakes." Luke turned away, his voice hoarse. "Go on inside, boys." As the twins disappeared into the house, he looked out toward the horizon where Clara had vanished and muttered, "Don't you go too far, Clara May. I ain't done tellin' you what you mean to me yet." Morning came soft and pale across Red Creek Ranch, painting the hills gold. Yet inside the big house it felt cold. The smell of breakfast biscuits was gone. The sound of Clara's laughter no longer floated through the halls. For the first time since the storm, Luke Carver's home felt empty again. The twins sat at the kitchen table, small hands folded, faces solemn. "Pa," Ben asked, "is Miss Clara comin' back?" Luke tried to answer, but the words stuck in his throat. He looked at their expectant faces and saw the truth written there. Clara hadn't just cleaned the barn, she had cleaned their sorrow away. And now that she was gone, it was all creeping back in. Billy's voice was barely a whisper. "We miss her, Pa." Luke looked down at his rough hands, the same ones that had built every inch of this ranch, and realized that for all his strength, he'd been a coward in one thing, telling her how he truly felt. He stood up suddenly, the chair scraping the floor. "Finish your breakfast, boys. I've got something I need to set right." Outside, the wind carried the faint smell of rain and pine. Luke saddled his horse, a big chestnut named Ruger, and tightened the reins. As he mounted up, his ranch hand, Tom Jenkins, came out of the stable wiping his hands. "Headin' somewhere, boss?" Luke adjusted his hat low over his brow. "Town." Tom nodded slowly. "To find the woman you let get away?" Luke paused, startled. Tom just smiled, half amused, half wise. "Ain't my first time seein' a man lose sleep over a good woman. Go on. Don't come back till she's with you." Luke gave a faint grin. "You're mindin' the ranch till I get back." Then with a sharp kick, he rode out toward Red Creek, the morning sun climbing behind him. The road was long and dusty, winding past open fields and the old mill. Every fence post, every curve in the dirt road seemed to whisper her name. He thought of her voice when she sang to the twins. Of the way she always looked at him like she saw through the hard shell and into the man he was before loss had made him bitter. And he realized something he should have said long ago. He didn't just want Clara there. He needed her there. When he reached town, he found her sitting alone behind Miss Grady's store, her small carpetbag at her feet, eyes red from crying. She didn't notice him until the sound of boots scuffed the dirt. "Couldn't even make it to the coach station, huh?" he said softly. She looked up, startled. "Luke? What are you doing here?" He dismounted, his tall frame casting a shadow over her. "Came to bring you home." Her lips parted, but no words came. He took off his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "You walked away thinking it was to save my name. But Clara May, the truth is, you're the one that gave it meaning again." She shook her head, tears threatening. "Luke, the gossip." "To hell with the gossip," he said, his voice low but fierce. "You think I care what a few wagging tongues say? Let 'em talk. Let 'em choke on it. I know what's true." He stepped closer. "You walked into my life when I'd near forgotten what it meant to feel. You took care of my boys when I couldn't see past my own hurt. You made this house a home again." She stared up at him, trembling. "You don't mean that." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, her silver locket, the one she had accidentally left on the porch. He held it out. "This fell when you left. I opened it. Saw that picture of your husband, and that baby." Her breath caught. "You had no right." "I know," he said quickly. "But when I saw it, it hit me. You loved him with all you had. You know loss like I do. And still, you've got enough heart left to love my boys, and me, without even knowing it." The world went quiet around them. Her eyes glistened. "Luke Carver, you're making it awful hard to keep my distance." "Good," he said with a half smile. "I'm done with distance." For a long heartbeat, neither moved. Then, as if the moment made its own decision, Luke stepped forward and pulled her gently into his arms. Her head rested against his chest, and for the first time in years, he breathed easy. "I was so scared," she whispered. "Everywhere I go, I lose someone." He brushed her hair back tenderly. "Not this time. You're done losing, Clara May. You hear me?" Her tears soaked his shirt, but she nodded. "I hear you." He pulled back slightly, eyes soft. "Come home. Not as my housekeeper. Not as the woman folks talk about. Come home as the woman I love. Her breath caught. You love me? He smiled faintly. Reckon I've been trying not to for weeks. And I'm tired of fighting it. Clara laughed through her tears, a sound so sweet it made the wind itself pause. She nodded slowly. All right, Luke Carver. Take me home. As they rode back toward the ranch, the sky broke open with sunlight, the fields glittering from last night's dew. The twins saw them from the porch and ran out shouting, Miss Clara! Pa found you. Clara laughed, jumping down from the saddle, gathering both boys into her arms. Luke watched them, his boys wrapped around the woman who had mended their hearts, and for the first time in years he felt peace. He stepped forward, tipping his hat. Boys, he said, voice gentle, how about we stop calling her Miss Clara? Billy frowned. What do we call her then? Luke smiled, eyes warm on her. Let's ask her what she thinks about Ma. The boys gasped, then looked at Clara with wide eyes. She covered her mouth, tears spilling, and then nodded. I'd like that very much. The boys cheered, hugging her tighter. And Luke, standing behind them, silently vowed he'd never let her go again. The air at Red Creek Ranch was different now, gentler somehow. The long, lonely echoes that once haunted the fields had been replaced with laughter, the thud of small boots running across the porch, and the smell of warm bread drifting from the kitchen. Clara stood by the window that morning, sunlight spilling over her face. The twins were outside chasing a puppy Luke had brought home from town, a little brown thing that couldn't decide whether to bark or wag. She smiled softly, hands resting on her apron. For the first time in years, she wasn't listening for footsteps that would take her away. She wasn't waiting for the next loss. She was home. Luke came up behind her quietly, boots light on the wooden floor. Something on your mind, Mrs. Carver? The sound of that name still sent a warmth through her chest. She turned, smiling up at him. I don't reckon I'll ever get used to you calling me that, she said. He grinned, that rare boyish grin that used to be buried under grief. Guess I'll just have to keep saying it till it feels natural. Clara chuckled, leaning against him as he wrapped an arm around her waist. His touch was steady, protective, but soft. Feels like the ranch is breathing again, she whispered. He nodded. So am I. That afternoon she took the twins down to the creek. The water sparkled under the sun and wildflowers dotted the banks. The boys splashed and skipped stones, their laughter echoing across the hills. Ma, look! Billy shouted, holding up a frog. Put him back, sweetheart, Clara said, laughing. He's got his own home to get to. Luke stood a few steps away watching her. Watching the woman who had walked into his life like a quiet miracle and turned every empty corner into something alive again. Tom Jenkins rode by on his way to check the cattle, tipping his hat as he passed. Looks like things are finally right up here, boss. Luke smiled. They sure are. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the horizon, the family gathered on the porch for supper. The boys leaned sleepily against Clara, their eyelids heavy, bellies full. Luke poured her a cup of coffee, his fingers brushing hers as he handed it over. Clara, he said softly, I've been thinking about how all this started. She smiled, her eyes distant. You mean the day I came to clean that barn? He chuckled. I remember watching you that day, hair full of straw, humming to yourself like you'd been there all your life. I thought you were the most stubborn, hard-working woman I'd ever met. She tilted her head. You thought I was trouble. He grinned. That too. They laughed quietly, the kind of laughter that comes from people who've been through storms together and found peace on the other side. Then his face grew serious, eyes reflecting the lantern light. Clara, you know, I don't believe things happen by accident. Maybe the good Lord knew what he was doing when he sent a poor widow to clean my barn. Her throat tightened. And a lonely rancher to find her. He reached over and took her hand, rough fingers lacing through hers. I thank him every day for that. Later that night, after the twins were asleep, Luke found Clara standing by the window again, looking out over the moonlit pasture. He stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. It's quiet, she murmured. Peaceful. He kissed the top of her head. That's what a home's supposed to feel like. For a long while, they stood there in silence, watching the horses move slowly through the silver grass. Finally, Clara whispered, I used to think my story ended with loss. Luke tightened his hold. Maybe it was just waiting to begin again. She smiled softly, tears glinting in her eyes. Guess the good Lord knew I needed one more chance. He turned her gently to face him. And I needed you. Their lips met, slow and sure, a promise written in the quiet of the night. The next morning the twins burst into the room with shouts and laughter. "Ma, Pa, the calf's been born." Clara gasped and Luke chuckled, pulling on his boots. "Well, reckon we better go welcome the newest member of the family." They all hurried out together, the boys running ahead, Clara's skirt brushing the tall grass, Luke's hand resting at her back. And as the sun rose high over Red Creek Ranch, the sound of their laughter filled the valley, echoing like a song of redemption. A song that said, "Sometimes love doesn't come when you're looking for it. It comes when you're too broken to believe it could. And when it does, it makes even a barn feel like heaven."